All right, and let me just share my my slides. Okay. All right. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to welcome you to DAFFI 2020. I decided that we needed to have a memorable logo for this, if nothing else, although I'm hoping the conversations are going to be memorable as well, in which we have our academic poised to deliver feedback of some sort and a student who's not looking very impressed right now. I wanted to share a few thoughts just as provocations for what's coming up over the next 2 days. And start by saying, look, thanks for coming. We are also very busy, but I really appreciate you making the time for this, and I think it's going to be worth your while. I do hope so. Secondly, as we've just been chatting beforehand over virtual croissants and coffee, this is a really important topic, okay? We go to some academic things and it's interesting. This is really important, okay? We know how tough it is for students right now, given COVID, but it's always, you know, even without a global pandemic, this is really important. The COVID just adds an extra edge. Students are continually complaining about not getting good enough feedback, whatever they think that means. And our academics are not very well equipped to deliver good feedback because it's just assumed they know how to do that. So we've got the chance to make a difference, I think. We've got some, you know, really bright people around the table here. We're all leaders in our own fields. I'm hoping that we're going to break some new ground. As I was saying over coffee, when you get alignment between tech platforms and practices that use those platforms well, then I think you really can change things, because we are constraining how people do things, but we want to do that by design and not by accident. And we all can give good examples of platforms that are, you know, basically constraining us and locking us into poor pedagogy. Well, can we do better? We've got some people lined up, and I'm very grateful to them all who've made the time to prepare a presentation. But I want to emphasize that during the discussions, if you've got a graphic or something you want to flash up, then, you know, it's even easier in Zoom perhaps than if we were all in a workshop, okay? Just stick your hand up and show something that seems relevant as and when it's appropriate. The ending tomorrow is to be determined. That's somewhat emergent depending on how things go. We might decide there are some themes we want to break out into tomorrow afternoon, or stay in plenary. So just be making notes if you think there's something worth really drilling down into. I have to acknowledge all the colleagues down in Victoria, because this book was the catalyst for me saying, I really think I would like to bring you all up to UTS. It's got all sorts of insights in it, and I'm very grateful to all the editors and authors for the work that went into this. And I hope it's the springboard for some good conversations next. It's just really going to be unpacking many of the ideas in this book, or at least a small number of them, and seeing how that intersects with what we do in learning analytics. Okay, so we're talking about feedback. Traditionally, we're talked about feedback that humans provide. Okay, it's our hardworking tutors and academics. Now, of course, we've got the blue circle, and we're wondering, well, what happens when we've got automated feedback available as well? And more specifically, what about when we bring them together? I mean, I think it's that intersection which is of particular interest. And I'll refer to this as the sweet spot, where we've got humans and machines working well together, each of them doing what they can do best. And the question is, well, what exactly does that mean? I put the book on the left-hand side and I put learning analytics on the right-hand side, but I think we're really interested in the intersection as well. There are examples of fully automated feedback, but I think many of the examples that we might be interested in are in areas that are too complex for fully automated feedback. And we can have a discussion about what we mean by feedback, of course. And that certainly doesn't just mean grading, but it certainly also means more than transmitting information, as we will be talking about. I found myself musing on the kinds of assumptions that we're bringing in about what we think the attributes are of human feedback and automated feedback. Is this how we think? You know, the humans, they're empathic, they're nuanced, they can give great detail. The machines, wooden and clumsy and vague. Or actually, can humans be very vague, highly variable, ... and machines extremely precise, relentlessly consistent, never getting bored or tired with you? Well, depends on context. Context, I think. I think we'll all agree that humans are imperfect at giving feedback, and certainly so are machines. And I think it's unpacking the nature of that imperfection that is what's going to be interesting for us. If we give a piece of writing to a human and a piece of writing to a machine, the machine can do it in a few seconds. Okay, people don't read like that. Machines read differently, and they give feedback in a matter of seconds. That suddenly accelerates the pace at which a student can have another go, take on board that feedback and have another go. So the having another go and acting on the feedback is now reduced to a matter of minutes, rather than however long it might take in a traditional cycle. But if we're talking about a much more complex competency, for example, giving feedback to a trainee social worker on how they dealt with a family, well, the machines will barely have a clue as to what went on. So the complexity of the learning situation is going to obviously be a factor. And humans, of course, can read situations and spot patterns in ways that no machine can. So we're back to context again. Doesn't mean that there might not be any scope for automated feedback. Humans are typically assessing products. They often don't have much insight into the process, but we could have a debate about that. Certainly not at scale, because a human can only have so many eyes. Machines excel at tracking process at scale. Okay, that's what machines do extraordinarily well and very high definition in certain contexts. And they can, of course, look at a product that's been submitted to. But that's a provocation, and you might want to come back to that as well. So what exactly is in this sweet spot? And I just found myself looking at some of the writing that the feedback design people are doing, and looking at the writing of the field of learning analytics. And these are common concepts. Oh, I put it to you that these are common concepts. There's a lot of talk about sense making. What in the learning analytics field? You know, exactly what does a student take from some graph or chart or feedback that we give them? It's becoming clear that that's a non-trivial question. We're interested in behavioral change. That's what learning analytics does. We're trying to track behavioral change. We have no insight into a human other than their behavior. Okay. And then we try and make some inference that when we see some behavior, that might be a proxy for some kind of learning going on. There's an interest in no black boxes, whilst you guys, as in assessment design and feedback design, you're often talking about rubrics and the transparency of the grading criteria and making it clearer to students that, you know, the feedback they're getting is not coming out of thin air. There is some model that the academic has as to what they should be doing. And then there's a question about how well that's communicated. Clearly in learning analytics, we're talking a lot about trusting the algorithm and having a sense that this thing is actually trustworthy. There's a lot of talk about learner agency in learning analytics as well as in the feedback design literature. Okay, we are not trying to disempower students, quite the opposite. But we have examples where learning analytics disempower students. It demotivates them to be reminded constantly, if you're a struggling student, how poor you are doing compared to the average of the cohort, for example. Affect. Multimodal analytics is starting to pick up behavioral proxies and even physiological proxies of emotion. That's clearly an important dimension to feedback design. There's a lot of discussion about whether learning analytics is atheoretical or theory informed, and how those translate into the platforms that we design. Clearly, theory informed practice is something that feedback designers are very interested in. Co-design, the fact that there are, there's talk about helping students co-design assessment criteria and become peer feedback agents themselves. We talk about co-design in learning analytics as a ways of bringing non-technical educators and students into the design process to think deeply about what it is that will be useful to see. There's talk about reflection and analytics on reflection, especially written reflection. There's talk about dialogue, peer feedback, dialogue between educator and student. I mean, you can't give feedback without designing information, and that might be done in a more careful, intentional way. Or, as we know, many academics are really not very good at designing their information, and can give extremely misleading or demotivating feedback. So even though feedback is more than information transmission, information design is absolutely critical. Dispositions. I'm seeing some stuff in the book about whether learners even have the disposition to want to become literate in feedback. And we're talking in the learning analytics community about dispositions as well. The will to engage, as Dewey said, not just the skill or the ability to engage, but the will to engage. And then this notion of critiquing feedback and making feedback something that is discussed and even pushed back against by the learner. That's something that we're talking about in learning analytics, where the learner is given agency and encouraged to take a critical attitude to the AI or the algorithm. And that's designed to improve their learning. So, a few opening thoughts there. And the ... is obviously to signal that I'm hoping we're going to generate more examples of this, and we'll be unpacking what this looks like. So I'm going to pause there. There's a minute just for any quick reactions, and then we'll all hop to the next room for Dragan's talk. Any immediate comments?
I just want to say thank you, Simon. That was a really interesting introduction. I hadn't played the two sides of the coin with looking at automated or machine-based feedback and processes and the human like that. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Okay, right. I'm going to suggest that we now hop over to the next meeting, and we'll get going there. So thanks, everybody. See you shortly.